Okay, to aid the unemployed, the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, FERA, made large sums of money available to local and state agencies for direct relief to the unemployed. Millions of families received cash to help pay for food, clothing, and shelter. Food, clothing, and shelter, which the government at the same time is promoting the destruction of and trying to limit the creation of, because it thinks the prices are too low. Schizophrenic. It's schizophrenic. The Public Works Administration and the Works Progress Administration put millions of jobless to work on such projects as the construction and improvement of highways, bridges, schools, hospitals, parks, and sewers. Artists, writers, actors, musicians, and white-collar workers were employed on projects suitable to their talents and abilities. No joke, they actually had painters paint murals in government buildings and stuff. They had writers write pamphlets on the history of the Park Service and things like this. No joke, they actually just said, what do you do? Well, here's a project, and they just gave them money. Massive misallocation of resources. Government-directed distribution of resources, massively misallocated during a time when we needed to squeeze every bit of efficiency we could. It's a tragedy. The Civilian Conservation Corps provided employment for hundreds of thousands of young men on such conservation projects as reforestation, flood control, and improvements of national parks. Now, I submit to you that in a recession or a depression, that is there's a fantastic opportunity for investment, an opportunity for growth, for starting a new company or whatever. Here's all this labor at your disposal. There's not much capital available, so there's not much capital for you to compete with, so a good idea can go far. You don't have to have a lot of capital to start out in a situation when capital's scarce. That's an opportunity. And it usually only lasts 6 months or a year because a lot of companies start jumping on it and there's a rebound. The only way to stop that rebound is by arresting all those resources, taking all that extra capital. We're going to learn more about how they took that capital out in the form of wages. But by taking out that extra capital, raising taxes, keeping wages high, taking the extra laborers out of the economy. Some people say, oh, of course they're extra laborers, they're roaming around, they're vagrants. Why not put them to work building a highway? When a private economy project does come available, where are the workers? Where are the strongest young men and stuff? I mean, and where's the money being spent that has been taxed out of the economy that could have been left in the economy to build factories to employ these youngsters? And they're building useless highways and stuff that'll be there 50 and 70 years later. There are still dams all over the nation built by the CCC, which could have been built cheaper by private companies for profit. Anyways, the myth that the government helped in the Great Depression is a myth. To aid the recovery of industry, my God, how much crazier can it get? The National Industrial Recovery Act 1933 set up the National Recovery Administration, NRA. You thought that was the National Rifle Administration. Well, I mean, it is now, but the National Recovery Administration was set up in 1933 for the purpose of establishing codes of fair business practice. Fair business practice. Can you imagine? These codes limited the hours of employment, limited to 40 hours or whatever, established minimum wages, set up uniform prices for goods. This act was declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court in 1935. So for 2 years, American business labored under a legislative barrage and limited the hours of employment, established minimum wages, and set up uniform prices for goods. Uniform prices for goods, wage and price controls. Wage and price controls. Nixon tried it again in the 70s, didn't work then. Justinian tried it. Justinian tried it way back, Constantinople, I believe, and it was a disaster then. Every single time it's been tried, it was a disaster. The Chinese emperor tried it and enforced the use of paper money in his dynasty. Massive inflation. He did wage and price controls. Disaster. People talk about how the sophisticated Chinese had paper currency way back. Yeah, they had inflation, state controls, wage and price controls way back. Great, guys, great. Sophisticated Chinese. Okay. So this was declared unconstitutional. I want to say something about limiting the hours. Everybody probably knows that minimum wages are an economic fallacy. You can't just say everyone has to get paid this much. You know, if someone's doing a job that's not worth that, then paying them more for that is just a cost to the employer. And either the employer is just going to have to eat that, and why should he have to, or the person doing the job is just not going to get a job, and that's what actually happens. If you're not worth $4.25 an hour, $5.75 an hour, or whatever it is, then you just don't get a job. People just won't hire you. If they could hire you and just pay $2 an hour, just give you $2 every hour, they might hire you for that. But otherwise they won't. So some people who would have a job, at least getting cash, don't have a job at all. Unemployable, because they're so dumb they can only sweep floors, and you can't afford it, so you have to sweep the floor yourself, and that means you just have to work harder, stay an extra hour at night to clean the store and stuff, because you can't afford someone to assist you. Well, great. This did not improve our standard of living. How about limiting the hours of work, saying you can only work 40 hours? Nowadays you can work 40 hours, and after that you have to pay the guy overtime. In France, for example, 39 hours is the maximum that a guy can work. They limit that so that if there's more managerial jobs to go around, and they're doing that today in France. You know, there's 50,000 things that need to be done by managers in offices in France this year. Now, if the managers are working 60 hours each, then they're getting, you know, a lot of extra money they don't really need too badly. They could cut their hours by a third, and we could employ a third more people. So they limit their hours to 39. I don't even know if you have 40 hours. According to The Economist magazine in an article a couple of years ago. And maybe they've changed that now. For God's sakes, I hope so. But I doubt it. So what happens if 40 hours becomes the break point where it's more expensive to have this guy? You hire another guy and you send him home after 40 hours a week. Now what happens with that is you might have some really good employees who have two jobs because they can't work more than 40 hours here. You won't pay them. You won't let them work more than 40 hours at your factory or whatever. They're really good employees, but they have this second job because you won't give them more than 40 hours. They need to work more than 40. They want to work more than 40 hours. They have 40 hours plus available in their life that they want to use productively, to make money, to use for stuff. And you're not willing to pay them the time and a half the government stipulates you have to. So you have to get another worker, and let's just assume that the next worker you get isn't as efficient. Let's say you take your whole staff of 100, and you could cut your 20 poorest workers, your 20 worst workers, laziest, they're late more often or whatever, they're drunk half the time, whatever the problem is. Take those 20 worst and get rid of them, and keep the other people an extra 10 or 15 hours a week, if they want to. It's a voluntary situation. If you could do that, you'd increase the efficiency of the firm. But that's not allowed. Not allowed by the government. Thanks, guys. Thanks. Reducing efficiency, helping you out. Yeah, right. Tariffs were, throughout the 1800s, virtually non-existent. But in 1928, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, if you want to know more, get that from Mr. Salzman. This was proposed and they wanted to put tariffs as much as 50% on goods coming into the United States, and higher in some instances. Lately, Bush did a steel tariff how many years ago or whatever, but this massive amounts of tariff on virtually all imported goods, period. Not just agricultural goods, it's what it started with, but a rumor came they wanted to do it on all imports. That is